Life may have been harder in centuries past, but it was also a whole lot easier to get away with murder. From sympathetic juries to successful pleas of temporary insanity, here's how these famous figures killed someone and got away scot-free. You'd have to live quite the life for someone to eventually produce a biography called The Man Who Stopped Time, the illuminating story of Eadweard Muybridge, pioneer photographer, father of the motion picture, murderer. But really, the lengthy title of Brian Clegg's account of Muybridge doesn't even scratch the surface. Born in 1830, he traveled the world and helped advance the art of photography from its earliest days. Eventually, he became a pioneer in the sort of stop-motion imagery that would lead directly to the ability to make films. If you've ever seen the very short film of a man riding a horse, that's Muybridge. However, in the middle of this amazing career, Muybridge shot and killed a man. Harry Larkins was having an affair with Muybridge's much younger wife. To make matters worse, it was likely that Muybridge's child was actually fathered by Larkins. So Muybridge tracked Larkins down at the house where he was staying, asked to see him, and shot him straight in the heart. He then apologized for the inconvenience to the women of the house and waited to be arrested.
"I'm finished."
While the crime could have resulted in a death sentence, the jury ended up finding Muybridge not guilty, with the logic that even if technically illegal, it was not morally wrong to kill a man who had slept with your wife. Lizzie Borden was not famous before she was accused of a particularly violent double murder, but the crime and her infamous acquittal have made her a household name for generations. Lizzie was an unmarried 32-year-old living with her wealthy father and despised stepmother in 1892. A maid named Bridget Sullivan and Lizzie's older sister Emma also lived there, but Emma was away when the crimes occurred. According to the trial of Lizzie Borden by Kara Robertson, the first sign anything was wrong was when a neighbor noticed Lizzie was just standing in the doorway of her house. When asked if everything was okay, Lizzie replied, "Oh, Mrs. Churchill, do come over. Someone has killed father." That was an understatement. Both Andrew and Abby Borden had been hit multiple times with what was most likely an axe or hatchet. From the beginning, it seemed like the culprit had to be an insider. There were no other signs of a disturbance besides the two dead bodies. No one had heard anything, and strangest of all, it was eventually determined that at least 90 minutes had elapsed between Abby's death and Andrew's. Not many axe murderers hang around to ponder their actions. Eventually, Lizzie was arrested for the killings, but people found it almost impossible to reconcile the horrific crime with a woman in court. And there were difficult questions, including how she could have avoided getting blood all over her clothes. It took the jury a little more than an hour to return a not guilty verdict. Harry K. Thaw came from New Money and married the notoriously beautiful model and actor Evelyn Nesbit in 1905. However, Nesbit, who was in her very early 20s, had been in a serious relationship before that. When she was around 16, she began a relationship with the famous architect Stanford White, who was 3 decades older.
Wow.
When Thaw initially became involved with Nesbit, he knew about her relationship with White, but saw himself as saving her from a dirty old man. Nesbit could tell there was something off about Thaw, who was known to have a violent streak. She kept him at arm's length, but he kept pushing, even taking her to Europe and trying to get her mother to force the young Nesbit into a relationship with him. It didn't help that he was obsessed with women being virgins until they were married, which Nesbit was decidedly not. Eventually, she told him that White got her drunk and sexually assaulted her, although it's unclear if this is what really happened or if she was trying to placate Thaw. Thaw and Nesbit finally married, and the next year, Thaw shot Stanford White to death at a theater performance in front of hundreds of witnesses. At Thaw's sensational trial, his defense was that he killed White in a moment of temporary insanity because of what the architect had done to Nesbit. His first trial resulted in a hung jury. He was acquitted at his second one. Daniel Sickles was a sitting congressman from New York in 1859 when he shot and killed Philip Barton Key, a U.S. district attorney, as well as the son of Francis Scott Key. Daniel had recently learned that Key was having an affair with his wife Teresa, thanks to an anonymous letter that would eventually be reprinted in national papers, including the White Cloud, Kansas Chief. It read in part, "There is a fellow, I may say, for he is not a gentleman by any means, by the name of Philip Barton Key, who rents a house for no other purpose than to meet your wife, Mrs. Sickles. He hangs a string out of the window as a signal to her that he is in, and leaves the door unfastened, and she walks in. With these few hints, I leave the rest for you to imagine." Daniel, while no faithful spouse himself, was seemingly the last person in Washington, D.C. to know about his wife's affair with Key. Teresa confessed to him when he confronted her, and before she could let Key know that her husband knew about them, her lover turned up outside their home and signaled for her. Having seen the signals, Daniel emerged from the house a short time later and shot him dead. At his trial, Daniel's defense team allowed that he admitted shooting Key and intending to kill him. He claimed temporary insanity and was found not guilty, with the jury's verdict leading to cheers in the courtroom. However, Daniel would cause far more scandal when he got back together with Teresa after his acquittal, which Washington society could not get behind.
Unacceptable!
Sojourner Truth was born into enslavement as Isabella Baumfree around 1797. She escaped to freedom in 1826, eventually ending up in New York City. It was there that Truth found God, which would end up getting her in a lot of trouble. Through her work as a servant and housekeeper, Truth was introduced to a Pentecostal version of the Methodist Church, and it was because of this group of worshipers that she met Prophet Matthias. He would eventually lead Truth and other followers to a communal living arrangement that was effectively a cult, with all the abuse, control, and strange sex stuff that goes along with your average cult. A person named Elijah Pearson bankrolled the group until one day he got violently sick. Matthias refused to let anyone call a doctor, and Pearson died. Another member, Benjamin Folger, accused Truth of not only conspiring with Matthias to kill Pearson, but of trying to poison him and his wife as well, because they had once gagged after drinking coffee she made for them. After Folger's accusations, Pearson's body was exhumed and an autopsy determined that he had been poisoned. Truth took the huge gamble of taking Folger to court for libel over his accusations, but she won and managed to avoid going on trial for the murder. Matthias would also eventually be acquitted of the murder charge in criminal court. Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart were not the only famous pilots of the 1920s and 30s. Englishman Bill Lancaster met Australian Jessie Chubby Miller in 1927. They were both married to other people, and at first their relationship was purely about flying. Lancaster agreed to bring Miller on a flight from England to Australia, which ended up giving her the record for the longest flight by a woman, even though she didn't actually do any of the flying over the 5 months it took to make the journey. By the end of their adventure, the pair were romantically involved. However, they spent the next several years in an on-off relationship, and Lancaster even tried to repair his marriage at one point. Miller got her pilot's license and ended up setting more records. In 1932, she decided to write a book about her life, or rather, hire someone to write it for her. That was how Hayden Clark moved in with Miller and Lancaster and ended up in a deadly love triangle. Clark went so far as to ask Miller to marry him while Lancaster was away. Distraught upon learning she'd accepted his offer, Lancaster returned home. On April 20th, 1932, Clark died from a gunshot to the head. Sounds totally plausible, right?
No, man.
While Lancaster was charged with murder, he insisted that Clark had died by suicide. At trial, Lancaster came off as an outstanding person, and Clark's past was cast in an unfavorable light. The jury believed it had been suicide and returned a not guilty verdict. There were two theories as to why Joseph Caillaux, the former Prime Minister of France, and Gaston Calmette, editor of the famous Le Figaro newspaper, hated each other. One possibility was that it was down to their very different politics, with Joseph leaning left and Calmette to the right. However, other people believe the men were fighting over a woman. That woman was Joseph's second wife, Henriette Caillaux. Whatever the reason, in 1913 and 1914, Le Figaro was publishing endless insulting articles about Joseph. Finally, the paper and Calmette went so far as to publish a letter they got their hands on that Joseph had written to his first wife when she was still his mistress. It managed to be both scandalous and painfully embarrassing as a document. Henriette believed her own correspondence might also be published at any time and decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the newspaper office and asked to see Calmette, at which point she pulled out a gun and shot him repeatedly. According to Lapham's Quarterly, when on the stand during her trial, Henriette insisted, "When I fired the first shot, I had only one thought at the moment, to aim low at the floor to cause a scandal." When confronted with the fact that there had been 5 further shots after the first one, she explained, "They went off by themselves." As the jury had apparently been rigged in her favor and consisted almost entirely of her husband's supporters, it took them less than an hour to find Henriette not guilty. Bill Haywood was a founder of Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies. However, his union and labor activities included other groups as well, like the Western Federation of Miners, of which Haywood was Secretary-Treasurer in 1907 when he was tried for murder. On December 30th, 1905, Frank Steunenberg was assassinated. The former governor of Idaho had crushed the strike by miners in 1899 by calling in troops, enacting martial law, and imprisoning many of the strike leaders. So when he stepped out of his house and triggered the bomb that killed him, the WFM were logical suspects. Fortunately for Haywood, one of 4 men charged with the crime and the first one to go to trial, he had the famous Clarence Darrow as his defense counsel. Darrow's closing argument exhibited his talents at their absolute peak. According to Wayland's Monthly, he told the jury, "Don't think for a moment that if you kill Haywood, you will kill the labor movement of the world or the hopes and aspirations of the poor. Haywood can die, if die he must, but there are others who will live if he dies, and they will come to take his place and carry the banner which he lets fall." Despite Darrow's brilliance, everyone thought Haywood was done for. However, the majority of the jury members felt that the judge's instructions made a conviction virtually impossible. It took the jury 21 hours, but finally the few holdouts gave in and Haywood was found not guilty.